Why should we care about hormones? Why is that important?
I think we should care about hormones, but sometimes I feel like we care a little too much about
Mm.
hormones as well. So when I went into writing my first book, it's the women's, you can see the girls back there, the Women's Brain book. It's got different titles in different parts of the world. I wanted to take a look at sort of, your the female brain, I suppose, for want of a better word, sort of a womb to tomb look, like how is our neurobiology shaped by our physical experiences of being a woman and being a woman in the world? What happens to our brains during puberty, during pregnancy, menopause, old age? Why are girls and women more vulnerable to anxiety and depression than boys and men? Boys and men experience that, but if you kind of had to take a look at numbers, there would be more girls and women in that sort of space. Why are women more vulnerable to Alzheimer's disease later in age? And so I wanted to kind of explore a lot of these questions about, I suppose, female life transitions through the lens of neurobiology. And I went into this as a neuroscientist, but not with a very firm understanding of neuroendocrinology, so kind of the neuroscience of our hormones. And I very much went into the book thinking, well, I'm going to learn a whole lot about hormones, particularly estrogen and progesterone, sort of female sex hormones released from the ovaries. But what was really interesting was at every stage, whether I looked at puberty, whether I looked at pregnancy, whether I looked at menopause or other experiences, hormones were only kind of like one voice in the crowd in terms of determining an outcome or an experience. So puberty, so we've just been talking about kind of like male female puberty, and this idea, well, obviously the testosterone in the boys turns them into men, and estrogen, in the girl, it's like when your gonads kind of turn on with puberty, then that kind of starts to shape and sculpt your body, but your brain also goes through puberty too. And I kind of thought, well, as it the hormones of puberty that will make girls more vulnerable to depression as teenagers than boys. Not to say boys are not, but on average, girls are more vulnerable. But what was interesting was when I looked, there was this one particular longitudinal study done here in Australia looking at the development of sort of social emotional problems around puberty. And if you looked at girls who entered puberty much earlier than their friendship group, they were far more vulnerable to develop social and emotional problems or mood disorders versus girls who went through puberty at the same age as their peer group. And boys were kind of, slightly early. Boys who went through puberty slightly earlier than their friendship group were sort of slightly protected versus those, there's always that little guy in everyone's class and he's 16 and he still hasn't grown. Those boys are far more vulnerable. And so you've kind of got pubertal hormones kicking off in these kids at these different ages, but the stronger determinants of, their social and emotional outcomes was the kind of the context those kids were in. Hey, my body's changing. What's happening with my friends' bodies, my friends' perceptions of me, my perceptions of them. Context was a stronger determinant of an outcome than simply a hormone. So it's always kind of like hormones are important, but in context. We see the same if we think about PMS in women as another kind of went into looking at that in my book, thinking, well, I'm really interested in the role of female hormones and mood. I personally have always been pretty mood stable. I've never really kind of shown any monthly fluctuations, and I've always been pretty stable. So I did kind of go in going, well, how many women suffer from PMS? This must be a thing, right? And I started looking at all of these studies, and I came across a global meta-analysis looking at rates of PMS around the world. So women putting their hands up and saying, yep, I suffer from PMS. And it varied like dramatically by country. Some countries, around 10% of women were saying, yeah, I have PMS. So say France. Spain, it was around 20 to 30%. You would go into Middle Eastern countries, it could get up to as high as 90%. So that's kind of wild, like 10% to 90%, with lots of different countries in between. and I was like, well, if this is a hormonal thing, why is it varying so much depending on social cultural context? And we see that a lot. We see hormones are kind of one voice in a crowd, but often what shapes an experience is not just the hormone, it's the context a person is experiencing. This perhaps hormonal shift or neurological shift or life transition in.
So it
So
has a
yeah,
lot to
they're
do with,
useful and important, but I think we can focus on them so much we forget about the other kind of, taking a biopsychosocial approach. Stick the brain in the middle. You've got the biological influences of your body. You've got the social, cultural, the world kind of making its way into your senses. You've got streams of information coming in. And now with my phone with me, you've got your, thank goodness I haven't got my phone with me. You've got the every calamity and war and disaster and opinion of every single human on the planet like streaming in. It's like right in front of your face. Wars used to be on the other side of the world. Now we're expected to be live streaming them and having a firmed opinion on them. And then we've got, our psychology, this kind of top-down expectations, memories, experiences, meaning making. And I think when we think, well, hormones are important, we're forgetting about all of the other data that's coming into our brain that we're making meaning of. And that's what my research in my book showed me. Hormones, that they play a role, but they're not the loudest voice in the crowd all the time.
yeah. And I think they can't be like this handicap for the reason, like, maybe why, like, my hormones are this, so this is why I'm this way, instead of,
We default,
looking at
we blame them.
yeah. I
Mm.
mean,
We see that particularly girls and women almost have been sort of fed this story. And I haven't got daughters, so you can be sure I would have not been saying this if I did. If you've got a female body and brain and you add female hormones in, it doesn't matter whether it's puberty and they're kind of kicking off, your menstrual cycle where they're fluctuating every month, you're on the pill, they're kind of high but stable. Through pregnancy, they're sky high. Menopause, they sort of start to fluctuate again and then kind of whittle away. It doesn't really kind of matter whether they're going up or down, they're high or low. We're blaming them when things go wrong. And it's almost as if we've been taught that the combination of a female body and brain and hormones automatically equals emotional instability and cognitive dysfunction and decline. It is inevitable. And that's simply not the case. Thank goodness that's not what neuroscience is showing us. I tried to unpack these ideas in my second book on baby brain.
right.
There's the context and the expectations and the meaning we're making of all of these hormones. Yeah, they're playing a role, but the kind of the volume will be different in every person, and then almost the meaning that you're making of that signal is going to be different in every person too. And we just have this tendency, especially for women. You never hear men. The men love their tea, right? You love a bit of testosterone and you worry if it drops, whereas women are kind of taught that that'd be blamed when things go wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, well, I mean, at least I can relate it to nowadays. If masculinity is always toxic, then I might as well just not try. I might not do anything, and I won't try to be my best, and I'll just that's my blame. And the same on the woman's side. If I'm always emotionally unstable as a woman, I might not even try and to do anything else, when obviously that's not true. I have emotionally stable women in my life. I've met them all the time. We all have emotions that fluctuate and things that bother us. But if that's my handicap, if that's what I always fall to, then I don't have any agency or response to direct it in any sort of other way. I'm just I'm throwing bricks on myself and I'm wondering why I can't stand up.
Yeah. Oh gosh, you're speaking my language. Yeah, absolutely. We just take this deficit. I think testosterone in men has a different kind of cultural narrative at the moment than hormones do in women. But in women, they're often associated with deficits, not strengths. And my second book, Baby Brain, really was talking about, well, hey, the hormones are driving a large degree of the neural architecture changes that are taking place during pregnancy, and their evolutionary adaptive changes to enable the kind of the brain to become a maternal brain, to sort of read babies' social cues once they're born and to kind of almost focus on the baby, forgetting about everything else. And that's an adaptive benefit. It might not feel like it because babies are hard work, right? Like they cry, but you just kind of can't keep your hands off them either. You just kind of want to eat them all up. They're so gorgeous. And I spent a lot of time trying to explain that these are positive, beneficial changes that were driven by pregnancy hormones. But yeah, we focus on the deficits in female hormone narratives, not the strengths. And now we've kind of there's a whole new kind of story emerging around menopause and hormone therapy, which is kind of weird because we've got this really negative narrative around the oral contraceptive pill, and they're both like hormones that you're supplementing, right? Like can actually take the same medication for both. So, we're making a lot of meaning there that's not necessarily evidence-based, but that's just my little pet peeve.